Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak in favour of the Electoral Miscellaneous Amendment Bill of 2024. I'm pleased to see this bill come before us as it contains many changes which will help update and improve the accessibility of our electoral system. Indeed, I commend the Electoral Commission of South Australia for their work in identifying areas of improvement and recognise that the government has taken up many of these as part of this bill. At the heart of the changes to the Electoral Act before us is a recognition that our legislation is out of step with the current realities of the world that we live in and the needs of voters. And indeed, we have seen many elections over the last few years where many people have voted early. Those votes have not been counted on election night, and it can create a false impression around the views of electors and indeed those results, whilst the vote is still being counted. So I think most people in the community would welcome this as a common sense change. There are also some important measures within the legislation that I submit to you will help protect the integrity of our elections. These include measures such as banning robocalls and regulating the use of artificial intelligence in election advertisements. Indeed, on the issue of robocalls, the Greens have been supportive of banning that for many years. I remember during the dying days of the Marshall government, there was an electoral reform bill that came to this place, and I think it was then the then Shadow Attorney General, leader of the Labor Party in this place, put forward an amendment to ban robocalls, which was inserted into the Act. The Greens supported that. It passed the upper house, but then my recollection is the bill languished in the lower house because the Liberal Party didn't want to bring in that change in the lead up to that state election. And I think that was disappointing because robocalls are something that I think undermines, in many ways, the public's confidence in our elections. They're very unpopular and very irritating for a lot of electors. So I think getting rid of robocalls is something that will be welcomed by many of the community. Also, a number of the elements of the bill will make it easier for South Australians to vote, and I think that's a really good thing. Before I delve much further into the key elements of the bill, I will outline the basis of two of the amendments that the Greens will be moving today. We recognise fundamental to this bill is the intention to make South Australia's electoral system more inclusive and better able to engage with the public, particularly young people. And some of the provisions in the legislation, I think, will make it easier for young people to vote, and that's a good thing. However, one of the omissions, I think, is the failure to act on lowering the voting age. We're not proposing that voting be compulsory for 16 or 17-year-olds. Rather, we are suggesting that voting for that cohort be optional. 16 and 17-year-olds in our state are already able to work. They pay taxes. They can get a provisional licence. They can even join the army, but they're not able to vote and have their say on the direction of the government in our state. Now, I heard the Leader of the Opposition say in her remarks that young people's brains are still developing and they're not able to make decisions in that regard. Well, let's not forget, here in South Australia, the age of criminal responsibility is 10. So we're saying to these young people that they can be held criminally responsible under our laws, but they're not able to actually determine their views on politics when they're 16 or 17 years old. I find that a ridiculous proposition. Surely people who are paying taxes, people who are out in the workforce, people who are engaging as citizens should have a right to vote. And it's the Greens' hope that were a change like this to become law, then political parties would become much more responsive to the views of young people. And if we look at issues like the housing crisis, if we look at issues like the climate crisis, these are long-term policy challenges. And the impacts of the decisions that we make are intergenerational. And the Labor and Liberal parties are doing a woeful job in terms of addressing those challenges in a meaningful way. And maybe one way to reorient the politics of this place is to enfranchise those young people. They deserve a voice. I also recognise the work of the government in terms of civics education. That's great, but what better way to improve the engagement with young people in our politics than through giving them the opportunity to vote on an optional basis. I think it would be welcomed by a number of young people. Indeed, I recognise that the Commissioner for Children and Young People in our state has been doing a lot of advocacy around this. I will just briefly turn to the second amendment that the Greens are moving. This amendment delays the provisions relating to changes regarding the placement of corflutes for federal elections. When the government put forward draft legislation, it wrote to political parties asking their views. It wrote to the Greens party asking the views of the party organisation. The election campaign committee had a discussion regarding the bill and provided some feedback, which was the basis of the amendment that I am moving. Indeed, it has been the concern through some of the feedback that I've received that making this change so close to the federal election, given the federal election is only a few months away, could pose some challenges. So the amendment reflects that. I'll now turn to some of the provisions within the bill that are informed by the recommendations of the Electoral Commission. One of the alterations to the existing Act is that voters will now be able to enrol to vote on the actual day of the election. Voters will no longer be required to enrol beforehand. They can enrol up to and on the election day. I think that's a really positive advancement for democracy in our state. It will bring South Australia into line with other jurisdictions, and it will help young people actually exercise their vote, because we know for a lot of reasons young people may not always be on the roll. We know also that young people are more likely to rent, they're more likely to be transient in terms of their address, and so giving them the flexibility to enrol right up until election day, I think is a really positive advancement. And after all, we should be doing what we can to encourage people to vote and exercise their democratic right. Another alteration in terms of change to the status quo that I note within the bill is the change to the Act allowing South Australians to vote early without needing to sign a declaration and without needing to provide a reason. I think a lot of South Australians who exercise their early voting do so without necessarily having a compelling reason. It used to be that if you were going to cast your vote early, you needed to demonstrate that you were, working or attending a wedding or had some significant event that you couldn't get out of. I think in recent years, more and more South Australians have sought to avail themselves of the early voting provisions. It makes sense to relax those requirements to reflect what is actually happening. I'm also pleased to see amendments relating to itinerant electors, that is, people who are homeless or those who might be travelling within Australia. This bill exempts electors who have no fixed address from compulsory voting. It also allows them to stay enrolled, even if they're outside of South Australia for longer than a month. This is an important step as compulsory voting requirement, which I'm strongly supportive of, but this can be difficult for someone to comply with if they're itinerant, if they're someone who is homeless, or if indeed they're travelling interstate. We support moves to encourage itinerant electors to stay enrolled and accommodations for this cohort to prevent them being punished for their lack of permanent address. And of course, my views on addressing the homelessness crisis are well known in this place, and I think the government and indeed the Electoral Commission should do what they can to engage homeless voters. We also support the changes to postal voting that come with the bill. Sadly, Australia Post is becoming increasingly unreliable. It's important for our laws to reflect that. The bill goes further to make inherently sensible changes, allowing postal vote applications to be made online or over the phone rather than needing to be made via the post. And also it stops political parties from being able to control those postal mail-outs, which again is something that isn't really, I think, in the spirit of democracy in our state. There's some important changes here too, allowing sight-impaired and motor-impaired voters to use telephone assistant voting. That's another really positive change that we think will help people. And of course there's a final change which will allow absent voting, simplifying the process for voting outside of your electorate. And I have heard stories of people going into polling booths not being able to vote because they don't live in that particular area. Again, it makes sense to streamline that. So I welcome the government taking action on that. So in closing, the Greens are supportive of the provisions within the bill, but we would like to see the government go further to give 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote. Just recently, Mr President, this parliament made history when we became the first place in the world to ban political donations. We could become the first state in Australia to give 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote. And I urge the government to consider this sensible suggestion from the Greens and to show some leadership in that regard.